everyone. This is Passport Necessary. I am Layla Gentil,
And I'm Marcus Rosati.
and today we are going to be talking about moving. So, this is not an experience that is exclusive to TCKs.
No,
For anyone who doesn't know, TCK means third culture kid. But I do think that it's an interesting topic from the perspective of TCKs.
it is because I think for me personally, anyway, I think for a while, especially if you come, as we discussed it before, I think the idea of being an outsider, if you are an outsider, it becomes a bit difficult to find a place that you feel like is home. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. I mean, you moved around a lot more than I did when you were a child, but even as an adult, I found it difficult to find a place I felt comfortable in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, even now, like, I've lived in the city that I've lived in for almost 4 years, or now it'll be 4 years.
Right.
And I'm comfortable, but I would not consider this like my home. I don't think I have a place right now in my life where I'm like, okay, this is my home. I feel at
Yeah.
home with my partner. I feel at home with my cats, but like the city itself is not like my home, if that
Yeah.
makes
That makes a
sense.
lot of sense. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to me. Because at the moment I've been, well, how long living in York now? I think I've been living in York for 4 years now. I
Mhm.
do come back to it quite a lot. I've moved around the UK, but York still doesn't feel quite like home.
Mhm.
And I did have a sort of long period of time of thinking about maybe moving on to another city, probably in the north of England or maybe just abroad even. It just comes into your head quite a lot, doesn't it?
Mhm. Oh my
But
gosh, all the time. Like we have my partner and I have theoretical conversations where I'm like, "Oh, well, if we moved, we could don't have to stay in the States. We could go here and we can go there." And he's like, "I have
yeah,
an American passport. I can only do so much." And I'm like, "All right,
yeah,
that's true." So, it is
there is that.
something that like as a theoretical discussion does happen frequently enough where it's not like
Hmm.
weird. Like it's popped up enough where it's like, "Oh yeah, no, that is a possibility in our life."
Yeah. I mean, because it always is. I mean, I suppose that's one of the things. If at least you have experience moving around a bit or being in a foreign country, you would sort of see that there are other places out there,
Mhm.
other things to do, other opportunities, I suppose.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I moved around a lot as a kid. Our first time we moved for my mom's job, I was 5, and then we did a
Hmm.
couple months we stayed like a couple months in Virginia so my mom could get training, and then we went to into South Korea, and I was there for 2 years, and then I was in
Yeah.
Guatemala for 3 years, and then I did 1 year in DC. That was
Okay.
not fun. DC, like the capital of the U.S. And then
Yeah.
I moved to Japan, and even within Japan, I moved. I was 1 year in Yokohama, and three
Okay.
years living in Kobe, and then after Kobe, we went to Paris, and I was there for 2 years, and then I went to college. And even when I was in college, every summer I moved. And during the summers, I either stayed in the U.S., but I would move around. I would go to different places, or I'd stay with family friends, or I would go back to see
Yeah.
my parents wherever they were, and that was
Yeah.
in either in France or in Algeria. So honestly, and I was just talking to my partner about this the other day. This is the longest I've been in one place. Um,
Okay.
in I think Halloween, because that was when we officially moved into this house. On Halloween will be the first time I've lived in a place for 4 years since I was 5 years old.
Right. Okay. That's a
So,
new one.
yeah, that kind of gives you an idea of like how often I have moved in my life. Like I've
Yeah.
never been in a place longer than 3 years. So four is like a big deal for my brain.
Yeah. It's just, oh my god, how does this happen?
Exactly. It's like, why did I let this happen? But it's good, and the stability is interesting, but there are times where I suddenly get like moments where I'm like, "Oh my god, I got to go. We need to move. We need to go somewhere." And it's like,
Yeah.
thankfully I have a partner who's like, "Okay, we'll go on an adventure and we'll like travel, we'll drive around." I mean, it's harder now with everything that's going on, but um we still try and do like little adventures to like quell that desire I have to just like go somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still definitely there for me.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I definitely would like to go and see and do a bit more stuff. I mean, with my job because it's particularly sort of located in a specific place most of the time.
Mm.
I mean, I sometimes get a chance to travel to other cities to work, but because my colleagues generally tend to cover that, I don't need to travel.
Mhm.
I suppose I could if I wanted to, but at the moment it's kind of nice not to have travel with work because initially for about a year and a half I did travel with the job that I've got at the moment. So ended up working in started off in York, ended up not moving to Manchester. These are all some two northern towns in England. Um, but I worked in Manchester and then I moved to Oxford following the job. Moved back to York again following similar sort of stuff, and then this job, at least to an extent, gives you the opportunity to move between cities and work between cities, which is nice. So it does give you that sort of a slight element of at least getting out of the town.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's not quite the same as kind of upping sticks and just moving somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, the first move for you, you were a baby basically when you moved to
Yeah,
Japan.
yeah. I was a month old, something like that.
Oh
That's
yeah.
what my
You were
I
very
think that's what my
wee.
alien registration card says. Something like that. Um, so yeah, we ended up sort of like staying in Kyoto in Japan for most of the time. So we moved houses, obviously, but we stayed in the same city for 14 years, pretty much,
Mhm.
or at least I did. I mean, my two younger brothers obviously weren't the same age as me, so they spent a little less time of their lives there in comparison. But then we ended up moving to Kobe in Japan because of school.
Mhm.
So a bit of a distance, not too far, but a bit of a distance away.
Mhm.
That was the first sort of big city move that I had that I can actually remember. Then, when I left school, I moved to York for about a year, and then I was in London for 2.5 years, 2 years, something like that.
Mhm.
Back to York again for about 3 years, Oxford for a year, and then back to York again. So I keep coming back to York. I'm not sure why, but it's a very safe city. I think that's the thing.
Well, that's good. It's nice to have safeness. Safeness. That's not a
Yeah,
word. Safety. Having safety and a little bit of stability. It definitely helps.
yeah,
It gives a little ease and breathing room. I actually remember the first move when I was 5.
really.
Yeah, I like chunks of it. I don't remember all of it. I
Mm.
remember when we first left Louisiana, I left with my mom. My dad's, like, this is my memory. I could be wrong, but because I was 5 years old, I vaguely remember traveling with my mom. Um, and my mom brought our cat with us from Louisiana, and we couldn't get a
Right,
carrier. This was like a whole situation. This was back when you could kind of manage to get a cat on a plane without a carrier. So
right.
my mom had to manage to carry had brought us, my brother and I, and a cat onto the plane so that we could get to DC. It was a nightmare, and
Right.
I have to ask my mom more about that story, but apparently it was not fun for her.
I can imagine.
I do remember our first big trip the first trip where we went overseas for the first country that I lived in, which was South Korea. I remember at the time, and I think it's still like this. There's no direct flight from the States to South
Right,
Korea, so I remember that we flew to Hawaii and we
right. That would make
stayed in
sense.
Hawaii for like 2-3 days and
Hmm.
then went to South Korea. It's like
Okay.
a very vague memory of that, but I do remember that. And I remember getting to South Korea and being like, this is going to be great. I like vividly remember that being like, this is going to be awesome. And I was super excited. I think the thing for me was that I was such a bookish kid, and my brother and I were very highly creative. We loved telling stories to each other and like playing, that not having a lot of items wasn't
Yeah.
a problem for us. So like anytime we moved for sometimes months, usually a couple weeks, we wouldn't have our stuff, because you're
Right. Yeah.
waiting for
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
all your stuff to get imported, and depending on the country, sometimes it just like stays somewhere until they like
Yeah.
finish with customs and border patrol and whatever. But um, so I know moving, my brother and I got very much used to, just kind of doing our own thing, whether that was
Yeah.
for me reading a lot of books. We would tell each other a lot of stories. We always had a pack of cards on us. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, we were such card sharks as kids. We loved playing cards. But we always found a way of like entertaining ourselves without having to have lots of things because we couldn't have lots of things for long periods of time.
Yeah, that kind of there was a kind of a thing. There was a it's kind of carrying on from what you said about sort of like and not having stuff and telling stories and that kind of thing. There's a historian in Britain called Simon Sharma.
Mhm.
He's Jewish, and he did a history documentary for the BBC, maybe 5 6 years ago,
Mhm.
and it was called The History of the Jews. And somehow there was one part of it that stuck in my head, which was that there was this idea within Jewish culture that what you don't have, obviously because it's a diaspora. They're people who move around because they've been persecuted throughout history. And one of the things that he said was is that, or somebody I think in the document, I'm pretty sure in the documentary said was that they in Jewish culture a lot of stuff is actually portable.
Mhm.
So it's stories, it's books. They don't have the buildings, they don't have all that sort of stuff because obviously people are biased. Well, not just biased towards them; they're just actively out to get them because of
Mhm.
their Jewishness. I just kind of thought it was an interesting thought that maybe that some people who actually do move around a lot are actually much more possibly story based.
Mm.
Not particularly interested in necessarily large, heavy objects because they can't take them anywhere.
Mhm.
So it's a kind of a, I don't want to say non-material, but it's a different kind of cultural attitude, maybe. So you pick up ideas and things and stories
Mhm.
that are small or portable in your mind rather than objects like, a lovely table or
Mhm.
that sort of thing. I don't know if it's true, but it was an idea that came to my mind and you just reminded me of it and I just thought it was interesting.
I personally, like, just from my experience, I can't speak for other TCK folks, but
Mm.
I know for me that was a big thing just because playing for my brother and I was not necessarily heavily based on having items. As long as we
Yeah.
had like pieces of paper or cards or even just like each other, we would just tell each other stories or we would make up fantasies together. And we would kept saying like
Mm.
we would save it. Like if we would get to school, we would like create these like entirely fleshed worlds with like these characters, and they had rules that they had to follow, and if they broke the rules what
Right.
would happen in the game. So it was like game and storytelling blended together, um,
Okay.
and it existed completely separately from you know any other thing that we were doing. And I remember my dad telling my brother and I when we were older, he was like, every time I would drive you to school in the South Korea, my dad was the teacher there. So we would go to school all together.
Yeah.
He would drive us to school, and my brother and I would be sitting in the back seat just talking the whole time. We'd be like, okay, so then this character is going to do this. It's like, well, what does he say? He says, okay, I'm going to do. And so we would just detail all these like breakdowns of characters and what they would do and how they would say it and all the rules they have to follow. And then when we would get to school, we'd be like, save. And as soon as school would end, we would get back in the car and we'd start all over again. And it was like,
Okay.
it was a huge part of entertaining ourselves. We just constantly were creating stories.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
toys were fun, and we definitely played with toys. It wasn't like you
Yeah.
have a box, that's all you get. We're not cats. But it for us the things that were more interesting were highly creative. Like we wanted to do things that allowed us to be very very creative and
Yeah.
storytelling based.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm trying to think. Like, when we were kids, I think like for me, my brothers, a big thing was Lego and things like that, and you would create this sort of stuff using the Lego.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's an object. I mean, maybe because we were more sedentary compared to your family, that it was easier to kind of accumulate a few things and have them around.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, we did have that sort of stuff as a storytelling, at least, and ideas and characters and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the one thing is also the other thing that you just mentioned about like telling stories and things like that does remind me. I mean, the Bronte sisters. You know,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Apparently, what they used to do is almost exactly the same thing. Is that they'd tell stories and make them up, and they'd work together to create the stories in these worlds. And I think I can't remember how many of them there were now. gone out of my head, but they three of them wrote novels,
Yeah. No, and
and they're very
they were
famous,
highly
each in their own
prolific.
right. Well, I mean, I think it's Emily Bronte, wasn't it, who did Wuthering Heights?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, she only managed to write one novel, but apparently there was a lot of work that went into that. I mean,
I
I
have
suppose maybe
honestly,
the moving around and the isolation makes a difference. I don't know.
maybe, I don't know. I've never read Wuthering Heights. That's one of those books that like I always get told by friends. They're like, "Oh, well, you like Pride and Prejudice and like you like all these other books. Like you would love Wuthering Heights." And every time I go to pick it up, I'm like, "I'm going to read this." And I never read it. I always like, put it to
Yeah,
the side.
I mean that's the thing about like moving around, particularly in the UK. I mean, I think the thing is that you notice dialects and ways of speaking. I mean, in the UK doesn't have too many strong dialects, but there are accents that are more difficult to understand than others.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing about Wuthering Heights is that it is set in the kind of area that my mother's family on my grandmother's side comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So Yorkshire accents, they come from that sort of area, or sort of like up in the hills and all that. Well, not that necessarily that area, but like up in the hills and that sort of stuff. And Wuthering Heights is based on that sort of thing. And it's a really, really, really good novel. But it's interesting because it's so localized to specific areas, and you read the novel and kind of go, I have no idea where those places are, but the locals will know where
They
they
would
are.
know exactly where it
Yeah,
is.
I mean,
It's so funny that you bring up the accents and stuff because I've been rewatching Great British Bake Off
yeah,
recently, and my partner will watch it with me, and he'll like make funny commentary for me in the background. But there have been one or two times where he looks at me, he's like, I have no idea what they're saying. I'm like, oh, it's like an English dialect, it's an English accent. He's like, I swear I can't understand what they're saying, and I'm like, okay,
yeah.
well, they are talking. I promise you, they are communicating.
Yeah, it's funny as having moved around a bit, as you do notice sort of like local. I mean, because I mean the UK, what is probably about the same size as New York State geographically. I mean, the whole of it is probably about the same size.
I don't
I,
know,
th- I
actually.
think we discussed it once, and it probably. I mean, in terms of just geographical size, I think it is roughly the same size.
Probably. I mean, just the UK or Britain?
We'll say the United Kingdom. If
Okay.
Britain comes up, then
Okay, United Kingdom. Let's see. New York State is, oh, it's giving me population. I want to know square footage. Well, population of New York State is 19.45 million, and the UK has a
it's about a third
population,
of the
oh my
size.
gosh, the UK has a population of 66.65
Yeah,
million. That's huge. Um, Size. So the size of the UK is 93,628 miles squared.
it's great. Okay.
Uh, and then compared to New York State, let's see. New York State is okay. This is giving it in kilometers. There are more people who are going to understand kilometers. So, New York State is 122,283 square miles. The UK is
Oh right, okay.
243,610 square kilometers. So
It's double the
it's
size,
double the
roughly.
size. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um,
And there but
but
and comparatively there are more people, like size of the population, there are more people living in the UK than there are in New York State.
yeah,
And
population density is higher. Is what
yeah.
you mean? Is that? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very high. I mean, but also then you start looking at like New York City. New York City is its own weird thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. It's like London in the UK. It's like London is London.
Oh,
The rest of it.
I remember when I started living in Paris, and then I had friends of mine who were still in Japan, and they would
Hmm.
say, like, oh, well, how's France? And they'd have this image of France as this very, like, pastoral with, like, cows and cheese and wine. Like, that was their image of it. I'm like, okay, you have to think of it like Tokyo versus the rest of Japan. Paris
Yeah.
versus the rest of France is completely different. Like the people in Paris, the environment, like the buildings, everything. Like Paris is its own world compared to the rest of the country. Like it really is a unique city. Tokyo is the same way, New York is the same way, London is the
Yeah.
same way. Like big metropolitan major cities are not the best representative of the entire country or the entire state because
No.
they're so uniquely different. That's why I think it's funny when people go to New York and they're like, "Oh, New York is the US." I'm like, no,
No.
not at all.
No, it can't be.
Like I love New York. It is not the US. Also, the US is
No.
huge.
I mean, yeah, I think that's the problem. Is that, but I think particularly people in the UK don't understand. I think maybe sort of like having moved from an area sort of like where you are around people who are from the States and from different parts of the States
Hmm.
in school, moving back to the UK, the thing is your perspective on it is very different.
Hmm.
So I think there are a lot of things that I really like about American culture and things I like about how Americans do things. I like the confidence. I like the can-do attitude. I like the sense. I mean, it's genuinely true. I mean, it's
Hmm.
just that you have the sense that you can go out and do stuff.
Hmm.
Like there is just that attitude. It's like it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. We'll try again and we'll get it better next time. Whereas in the UK, there is a general idea of like, no, I can't do that. I can't do this. I can't do the other.
Hmm.
And you sort of go, why can't you do it? And it's like, it's because they tried once, realized that they didn't know how to do it, and then gave up. And it's like, but why would you know? It's like,
Hmm.
it's, and it's not, it's definitely a different thing. And like, there's other stuff as well, like having lived in Japan, like moving back to the UK, and you look at the way that people in the UK perceive Japanese people.
Hmm.
I'm sure, I think I did once, I was out in a pub once and somebody started talking to me about this, and I kind of snapped at them a bit because I was sick of hearing it. But like, oh, but the Japanese are also traditional, they're this and that and the other. Like, oh, those funny little people over there, aren't they wonderful? And I was kind of like going, yeah, but that's exactly what they think of you.
Yeah.
Because what you're seeing is what they want you to see to an extent in terms of, because they're trying to get you over there as a tourist, which is fine, fair enough. People are entitled to do that.
Yeah.
But it's exactly what the British do to the Japanese and everybody else. Is what they do to the Americans, is what they do to. So what you're seeing most of the time is what they want you to see in a sense, because they want you to come over and spend your money and they want you to have a good time as well and all that sort of stuff. There's nothing dishonest about it.
Hmm.
It's just that that's what they want you to see
Hmm.
because they want to encourage tourism because it's a business.
Hmm.
And part of the problem with it is that if you haven't been anywhere else or you haven't moved around a lot, you do find that there are attitudes and sort of assumptions and cliches that get really strongly ingrained in people's minds.
Yeah.
Like particularly in York, a really good one. This isn't even moving outside of the UK, and this isn't even moving outside of York. There is an area in York called Acomb, and there is this strong idea in York that Acomb is, the way some people describe it, is like hell on earth. It's like it's violent. You're gonna get your bike stolen. Everything terrible happens there. It's where all these people who we don't want to know about live. You go through Acomb. It's just a nice suburb of a wealthy city. That's what it is.
That's
You're,
interesting.
it's so strange. York's like this, and I think a lot of the people within York don't move around a lot,
Hmm.
which is an interesting thing. Because I do remember somebody, like I said, oh well, I've moved around quite a bit. And this guy came to me and said, "Well, I've lived in Rawcliffe," and you're like, "Yeah, that's in York." Next one, so, lived in, I can't remember exactly where he said, but it was, lived in Clifton. And you're like, "That's still in York, mate." Yeah, and anywhere else? It's like, lived in the Groves, still in York. Now I live on Lehman Road, and you're like, still in York, mate. I mean, when I say moved around, it's like it's strange. It's like conceptually there are two it's not stupidity as such. It's just not meeting
In
stuff,
the
not
same
understanding.
place. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
and it's
idea
interesting.
the idea of moving has very different connotations for different people. Like
Yes.
for some of my friends when I was in college, I would say, "Oh, I moved around a lot." And they were like, "Oh yeah, I moved around too. I like moved to two or three different houses as I grew up." I'm like, "Oh no, I moved to different countries." And they're like, "Oh, that's
Uh,
different." It's like, "Well,
yeah.
yeah." It's and I don't think there's one that's necessarily like better than others. There's something that's
No.
kind of that I almost envy for people who've lived in
Mm.
a similar area their whole life. Like they have friends that they've been able to have and keep lifelong. Like they've known
Yeah.
these people since they were kids. And so it's a very different way of interacting in friendships and having a
Yes.
very tight community that, you know, if something
Hmm.
happens, they could be there for you. Whereas
Yeah.
when you move around the way a lot of TCKs do, um, your community is a lot more spread out. It's a little bit more like
Yeah.
all over the place. And the friendships that you build, not that they're less strong, it's just that they're always going to have very wide ranging lengths of time that you've known people. Like the
Yes.
longest I've known someone that I like am still friends with, that I still actively talk to, is from when I was living in Japan.
Hmm.
When I was in like end of my middle school. So
Yeah.
that's, you know, comparatively not that long compared to people who have lived somewhere their entire life. Um, and I could see how that is very nice to have that constant knowledge of people, of being able to say
Yeah.
like, I know this person my entire life. The only person I've known my entire life has been my parents and my brother.
Yeah.
Like those,
Exactly.
I
And
mean, my grandma
maybe some other
family,
family
yeah,
members. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like friends, the like people who I still talk to, still am friends with, still actively correspond with, those are people that like the most recent have been high school,
Hmm.
essentially end of middle school
Yeah.
to high school. But it means that I think for me, the friends that I do have, we may not talk for like months, just because our
Yeah.
we have so many different life schedules and the way things happen in our lives because of different countries, time
Exactly. Yeah.
like time difference. That's a whole thing too. Like us being able to talk, we have to think about time difference. But
Yeah.
we'll not talk for months, and then I'll suddenly reach out and be like, hey, how are you doing? And it's like we haven't stopped talking. There's always that sense of like we're
Yeah.
still very close, even though we're not physically close to each other.
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean you just got it's a different kind of friendship. I think that's the interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
It works in a very different way. It's not even because people don't have the time. It's just because working out the time is different. It's like because my parents are still in Japan, so communicating with them was a bit different. You do end up communicating not through phone calls or face to face. You communicate through text and words and emails and Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever it happens to be that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's interesting. It's a really different way of organizing friendship, and I think the thing is you do kind of value those people sometimes more
Mm-hmm.
than some of the people you come across in your daily life because they probably know better
Mm-hmm.
how to communicate about stuff with you than most of the other people you're going to meet. And it's not because the other people aren't doing things properly or aren't trying. It's just there are certain areas of communication that are more difficult
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people who haven't been through the sort of like TCK experience and vice versa. Like having been through the TCK experience, there are certain things that you do and have assumptions about that other people just don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not their fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just that it becomes another way of communicating with well, safely in quotation marks, the locals,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And that's the thing about moving is that it does give you a lot of tools and things to help you work with people and things like that. But it also means that you're always feeling displaced.
Oh
And
yeah,
it's not necessarily a
absolutely.
bad thing.
Yeah, no, it's like if you think of a tree that's not really planting its roots very deep. If you leave a tree to just plant its roots and just constantly grow and grow and grow and build these really deep roots, trying to move that tree is
Mm.
very hard, and it's always going to be difficult. But if you have a tree that you're constantly moving and you're always like, you're going to take care
Mm.
of it, you're going to make sure it's watered and it grows and all that stuff, but it's never going to really put in those deep, deep roots.
Mm.
It's it's just a different way for that tree to live. And I think that's the way that
Yeah.
TCKs who move a lot, they have that feeling of like, the roots I have here aren't deep, but there's a lot of knowledge I have within all these
Yeah.
different areas. And I definitely agree that sometimes I value my TCK friends. I wouldn't say more, but in a different way, because like
Mm. Yeah.
I could reach out to some of my friends and be like, "Look, I feel very homesick." And they get it. They know
Mm.
what I mean. It's not a homesickness of a specific home, because I'm in my I'm in my place that I live in. I'm with my partner, but it's a missing of a country that I did call home, and I
Yeah.
and I want to be there, even though it might not be financially possible or timely possible. But
Yeah.
that feeling of like, oh, I wish I could be there. I wish I could hang out. Like those kind of feelings, I think, are very central to being a TCK.
Yeah. A kind of nostalgia, I suppose.
Yeah, a form of nostalgia, because
Yeah.
I think sometimes nostalgia, it can sometimes take on a very negative connotation of
Yeah, that's
almost
true. That's
almost
true.
wanting to live in the past because you miss it so much. And I don't think it's that. I think for TCKs it's more the sense of like, it's a place where I know I was happy before growing
Yeah.
up, or it's a place that I felt a lot of connection to, and I'm not
Yeah.
there right now and I miss it.
Yeah.
So it does have an element of nostalgia in it. But I
But
think,
it's not the kind of,
go ahead.
it was better back in the old days. It's not
No,
that kind
not
of
that
thing
kind.
quite.
But yeah, I think moving's fun. I think more
Yeah.
people need to, I think a lot of people get scared by moving,
Mm.
especially people who don't move a lot. But there is something kind of fun about, going to a new place, meeting all these new people, creating a new set of circumstances for yourself. Like, there is something that's actually very exciting when you move.
It it's pushing yourself beyond your boundaries, I suppose, isn't it? Sometimes you don't have the choice about the move or anything like that, but it does take you out of comfort zones and push you a little bit further. It does teach you to sort of be able to sort of like look at things and look at a situation and kind of go, how do I get through this? How do I
Mm-hmm.
get through that? Even if you get yourself into some of the worst situations, everybody, I suppose, has had terrible situations in their lives, even whether accidentally or partly through their own mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that I think maybe that ability to move and ability to look at things as something that you can work with, whether it's good or bad, I think that does come a little bit from moving around a lot.
Mm-hmm. No, I
I think there is
definitely
that.
agree. It gives you a malleability.
Yes. Plasticity, as they sometimes say.
Plasticity.
It's a good word.
That's a great word. I love that word. Um, cool. We kind of talked about moving then.
Yeah, we did actually.
Yeah. So, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. You can also reach out to me through Twitter. My handle is at Layla Gentil. That's LeylaGentil. And just hashtag it passport necessary so we know that the question is specifically for that. But other than that, we'll hope to see you next time. Well, not
Yes,
see
that'll be
you.
good.
We'll hope you'll listen to
Well,
us again.
yeah.
Until then, bye.
Right, see you. Bye.